Welcome, friends. It's a small but powerful group, and Suzanne's got a great show in store for us. You know, we started this about 14 months ago to give us something to do during COVID, and damned if that virus isn't back again. Suzanne is not docenting now, if that's a verb, because they've closed the docent tours for the Crocker, but they've kept the Crocker open, and there's some exciting shows, and we're going to see a little teaser of what's going on there now.
We're going to take a tour of the candy store, and we're going to talk about funk, nut, and other art with a kick tonight. But first, I just kind of want to do an acknowledgement of several of artists who have passed last year and the year before. There's about 12 of them, and they were incredible artists. Their art is just wonderful, and I have enjoyed seeing everyone. But I want to talk about the four of them that you have seen, because we have talked over the last year and a half about these artists. So let's go to our first one, Claudia. And this is Robert Bechtel. And remember, we talked about French Doors 2. Robert Bechtel was native Californian, and he was a photorealist painter. And frankly, some of his work, I can't tell if it's a photograph or if it's a painting. So we talked about French Doors 2, which is actually two canvases together, butting together, and they're split right where that French door opens. So we're going to miss his work also. This is Hung Lu, born in China, immigrated to the United States. Her story is fascinating, though. She was born during the Cultural Revolution, 1948. And the photo of her at the top was fascinating in that they had very little photos when she was growing up. She has one of her parents, but if you had a photograph of yourself during the Cultural Revolution, it meant that you had money, and that was not good to have. So there's very few of her, but that's her doing her duty out in the fields. And she became an artist, immigrated to the United States, and her work is absolutely phenomenal. And the one we have several of hers, but the one I am quite enamored with is called The Shoemakers, which we did discuss at one time. All right, let's go to two of our big hitters. Gregory Condos. We lost him in November of last year. He was a premier artist of this area, taught at Sac City College for many years. His work is phenomenal, and most of you are very aware of Gregory Condos' work. You might have a calendar of his, or you see a postcard of his, but he did beautiful, buttery, thick paint, just gorgeous landscapes of California, especially the Sacramento Delta. Let's go to his very close buddy we lost was Wayne Thiebaud, and that's the next one. And Wayne died at 101 in December of last year. And his work just brings a smile on my face. He takes simple items and he just makes them glow. And this work, particular one, Pies, 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 was a series that he did, of course, in 1961. You see one of him with Pies, Pies, Pies behind. Not the same, but just one of the series. Wayne Thiebaud's in the center, Gregory Condos is to the left, and Fred Dahlke, who was also an instructor at Sac City and Sac State, painter also. Wayne and Greg were the best of friends. My understanding is they had dinner together once a week. They watched game shows. Each of them painted every day until the day they died. And Wayne Thiebaud played tennis pretty much every day that he could. So we're going to miss them. They are giants in the field of painters in our area. So just wanted to give you just a little honor, a place to honor them. And the candy store. All right. Funk, Nut, and Other Art with a Kick. Now, this is a show that's going to be opening January 30th at the Crocker, and you're getting a preview of it. And let me start off with, what the heck is funk and nut art? Well, it's kind of challenging to define funk and nut art. And, you know, when one art historian says, you know, there's really no way to describe it, but you know it when you see it. And it's kind of like pornography, I guess. The funk art movement represents kind of this absurdist and free-willing departure in sculpture making. It's very avant-garde, it's wacky, it's whimsical, it's crazy, it's unrefined. It's often grotesque and frequently ribald. It's very irreverent art, and it's done by a group of very well-trained artists, but they are wacky and nutty, and they are irreverent too. Much of funk art isn't really intended to be easy to like, and it kind of runs the entire gambit of emotion, but most of all, it's fun. And tonight, if these don't bring a smile to your face, I'm not sure what will. But this exhibit is going to make you laugh. It's going to shake, you're going to shake your head, or you're going to cringe or wonder what the heck, but you won't be ambivalent. And funk art, what takes the name from, was a 1967 exhibit in Berkeley, and it was taken from the term funky. It was a jazz term from the 1920s, because many thought jazz was very basic and unrefined, just as funk was considered an unrefined style of art. The Candy Store Gallery, which is what this is all based on, was an art gallery in Folsom, in California, from 1962 to 1992. And this exhibit has more than 100 pieces of funk and nut art, and it celebrates what would be the 60th anniversary of the gallery's founding. And there's also a show at the University Library Gallery at the Sac State University too. Many of the artists we're going to see tonight either taught at the University of California, Davis, or Sacramento State University, or Sac City College. And they were pretty much embedded into this regional community. It was the artists from these three facilities basically stamped Northern California and Sacramento in particular as the beginning and the epicenter of the funk and nut art. It is just a fun show. The concept of the name of it, Other Art with a Kick, comes from the owner, Adeliza Mchugh, who said that if I'm going to drink, I want wine, and if I'm going to look at art, it's got to have a kick. And the art she offered in her gallery had a kick. So let's meet Adeliza Mchugh. Here we go. The first thing you probably notice is that she was a bit older, and she was coming into art a little later in her life. You know, everybody described her as grandmotherly, a very loving grandmother, but she was a loving grandmother with a heart of a lion, and she fought for her artists. In 1962, she opened the Candy Store Gallery in a little house in Folsom. It was a library at one time, and actually it was a candy store. She was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. She came with her sister to visit the Folsom area, and she found the little house for sale, and she decided to buy it and start a candy business to sell her family's candy recipe, which was almond nougats. Well, the health department shut that down, and she said, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. Maybe I'll sell art. And no, she didn't have a background in art. No, she had never sold art before, but she says, hey, why not? So she went to one of the artists, Irving Marcus, who was one of the first ones she knew. And she had seen his work at a show at the Crocker. And she went up to him and said, well, I have a gallery. I like your work, and I'd like to show it. And he said, well, what's the name of your gallery? And she said, well, I don't really have one, but I think it's going to be called the Candy Store Gallery. And the name stuck. So let's go to the next slide. There we go. Here's the interior. Adeliza moved in. She had a little rollaway bed that she slept on and a hot plate that she cooked on. And then the two front rooms were the gallery that she, showed the variety of artwork. And she made this work just like this for 30 years. It really wasn't a space that was meant for showing contemporary art. You know, the paneling was on the walls, was thin, it was hard to hang heavy things. It was a funky space. It was unpretentious, but it worked for the type of art that Adeliza offered. And as I said, nothing really changed over 30 years, just the art rotated in and out. But what was so amazing is that this little gallery, unknown gallery in Folsom, became, started to feature art by artists who would become nationally and even internationally significant in the funk and art style. And it, again, I can't emphasize enough, it basically stamped the Northern California Valley, Sacramento Valley, as the epicenter of funk and art. There were many, many funk and nut artists. Adeliza, what she did was so phenomenal, is that she created a community of artists with the Candy Store Gallery. It wasn't only a gallery for art shoppers, but it was a center for socializing and interacting with other artists. They all knew each other. They saw each other regularly. They worked in local studios. They taught at the colleges and university. They shared their talents and their vision and skill with hundreds of students. And although, as I mentioned, there's more than 100 artists in this exhibition, I want to focus on the Candy Store bunch. Those were the artists who were most associated with Mchugh's regular stable. And I'm not going to show all of them. I'm going to focus on just several of them. This photo of her, she's with some of her premier artists. And if you start at the lower level, that's Roy DeForest. And then in the purple shirt, that's Peter Vandenberg. And then Robert Arneson in the middle, David Gilhouli to the right, and Maya Peoples Bright. And I mentioned University of California at Davis, that's where Robert Arneson taught, and Sacramento State, that's where Irving Marcus taught, and he became the deputy chair. Roy DeForest taught there. They all taught at one time or another at one of those universities or state colleges. And then, as I mentioned also, that this was the epicenter for this art, but they all kind of collided in this gallery at the same time. And on top of the funk and art group, there were some Chicago artists that came to teach at Sac State, and they became part of this Candy Bunch. And they were the Harry Who group from Chicago. And that's Harry, like Harry, not Harry. It's Harry group, the Harry Who from Chicago. And it just really, really took off. So as I mentioned, the artists were friendly with each other. Adeliza would have openings on Sunday afternoon, and she would serve lemon cake, which she was well known for, and punch, Winky Winky, with a little bit of juice in it, and then white wine. And then some people would get together and they would stay for hours, and the place really wasn't big enough to allow everyone inside, so that would spill out into the yards, and it became quite festive, and it really helped cement the relationships between the artists and our region. And there was so much cross-pollination that was going on. And I think, people always say that was what emblematic of the Sacramento regional art. And I think that was one of the things that holds it all together, is this humor that they all did, and you'll see in their art. And that's probably true for this region more than any other region. So let's start with Irving Marcus, because he was Adeliza's first artist. And Irving Marcus was a key figure in the Sacramento arts community. He really fostered these exchanges between the Chicago, the Harry Hoo group, San Francisco, and the art of funk and nut at Davis and Sacramento. He was born in Minneapolis. He's received his BA from the University of Minnesota and his MFA at the University of Iowa. And then he began teaching at Sac State in 1959, and then later becoming its department chair. I want to mention Kurt Fishbach. He is the photographer for many of the photographs in this that we're going to see. And he was also one of the candy store artists. And he took photos of all of them. He started this project in 1979 and 80. So most of the photos we're going to see are Kurt Fishbach. He was really good at capturing the personalities of the artist as well as their artwork. And he puts them in situations that tells you a lot about the artist. According to Irving's family, this photo felt like it really captured him. He was kind of a quiet man, and he was very self-effacing. And let's go, his art is really funky. So let's go to the next one. Here we go. Most funk and nut art that we're going to see, the titles of it, the artwork are very interesting. They're almost sometimes interesting as much as the art itself. And this one, Doesn't Every Horse Have a Pool? And to begin creating a painting, Marcus would cut out newspaper images and magazine photographs that were very powerful for him. And then he would do a freehand drawing using pastels. Then he would experiment with color combinations, and then he would create his final painting. He would take things that were really oftentimes dark in theme, and then he would add this very focused, saturated color on top of it. He said that as a viewer, you're probably whipped back and forth between cheeriness and anguish. And his work did appear whimsical because of the colors, but it was dark, and it usually had a political theme behind it. This particular piece is somewhat mild representation of the political chaos work that he tended to do. There were always stories in the paper about cats jumping from a burning building or horses falling into a pool. And so he started to use those pieces, and his work almost always had police or military, because they seemed to appear in the papers. And he wanted to portray that the animals were substituting for people, and it was the people who were beastly and not the animals. And he plays with this very vibrant color, this red that you see, and the yellow, and it just sucks you in. And then once you get there, it just smacks you with the politics of the time, which in this particular one was 72, 73. Now, when Claudia and I were talking a little bit yesterday about these, we were talking about buying them. And a lot of the art that you're going to see from these artists is still relatively reasonable, and you can purchase it today. And part of it is because they did drawings, they did pastels, they did a lot of works on paper, they did some lithographs. So they were very prolific. And I've seen Irving Marcus work for sale for as little as $100 for a pastel, and oil paintings up into the several thousand. So, it doesn't mean he's not worth more. I'm just saying is that sometimes that's what the auctions will get, or, that's sometimes on a retail market. So resale market. So anyway,
actually, Suzanne's being kind of kind. I said, does anybody buy this stuff? And then I got schooled.
Yeah, you did. All right, let's go to our next artist. Next one is Jack Ogden, and he was another early member of the candy store, and he was introduced by Irving Marcus. and then Jack in turn introduced Robert Arneson to the candy store. So Jack is still alive and still painting. He grew up in Oak Park and in Sacramento, and he served in the Navy during the Korean War. And he also received an BA and an MBA from Sac State. He taught at Sac State for more than 35 years. And in this photo, you can see his studio in the background. He's mostly a painter, but he also sculpts. And the image on the right is a poster, and many times that these artists would make their own posters for the exhibits. And so here's a poster for one of Jack's shows in the 1960s. And you can see in the middle is Kennedy is in the middle, and George Washington is on top, and Abraham Lincoln. And then Jack Ogden is right there with him. And then on the left, there's a very windy road to Folsom, to the candy store gallery. And then the sign saying it's drawings and stamp works by him. So these were funky pieces and very rustic, and they made their own and they post them all over the place. Let's go to the next one. We'll see one of his works. There we go. This one just makes me laugh at the name, Have a Camel. Now, Ogden worked in oils and pastels, and here's the one called Have a Camel, with people sharing cigarettes. And you have to remember, in the 60s, most people smoked, and they're here on a beach, they're smoking their cigarettes, and you can see this very bright color. Most everything that he did was very bold, in either a bold color or a bold theme in politics. So his work, again, very reasonable. A painting of the bathers, similar to this, sold for about $2,500 in 2019. It actually sold from a local auction house, Witherall's in Sacramento. And Claudia's bought things at Witherall's that we know of. And I think she has them actually hanging up behind her. So let's go to the next artist, Claudia. Robert Arneson. He is really one of the all-stars. He worked in the Sacramento area. He taught at UC Davis and Mills College. And this photo of him taken by Fishbach is showing himself against a self-portrait sculpt, which became one of his favorite subjects. Yes, he became one of his favorite subjects. And I kind of think of Arneson as the father of funk. He was born in Benicia, received his BA in art from the California College of Arts and Crafts, which now is a College of Arts. He said an MFA from Mills College, and then he began teaching at University of California at Davis in 1962. When Arneson came to UCD in 1962, ceramic art forms were mainly art versions of traditional pottery shapes. You know, they were pots or vases or plates or tiles. Arneson abandoned those functional wares in favor of using these everyday objects to make very confrontational and to some very offensive statements. That movement then began to be called funk art. And Arneson is, as I mentioned, is considered the father of funk art. He started appearing in many of his own pieces, and he ultimately became best known for doing his own face, usually putting himself in very preposterous situations. So let's talk about the piece on the right. It's one of his earlier works of funk form. It's stoneware. It's obviously non-functional. He wasn't going for beautiful with this sculpture. It's meant to be deliberately crude, shocking, and confrontational. And the story behind it's kind of interesting. In 1962, he was under a lot of pressure to come up with something for an upcoming show in Oakland, when he had this epiphany in a bathroom at UC Davis. And his widow, Sandra Shannon House, who we'll see later, recalled that Bob said, "What am I going to make?" And then he says, "Oh, well, I'm sitting on it." So he began these whole series of toilets. There's 10 of them in this series that would cement his reputation as, oh, I don't know, potty-minded provocateur, I guess you could call him. Why he laid the foundation, which would later become the movement as funk art. And it's kind of, you know, it was a reaction to this abstract expressionism and lack of human figures doing human things. That's what a lot of the funk artists were pushing against. They were all very well grounded in abstract impressionism. They were all excellent artists, very well trained, and they just rebelled against the style of that time. Now, and it was also a counter to that cool, very impersonal pop art of the East Coast. California was very laid back, and they just didn't want to go with that style. The toilet, let's talk a little about the toilet. One is obviously male. The name of it is called His and Hers. One is obviously male. It's sporting a very bright male organ as a flush handle. And the seat kind of looks like poop. And the female toilet sports a pair of, you know, huge breasts, and in lieu of a water tank. And her seat is kind of a pair of red lips. So that was his foray into it. And there's 10 of them, and they don't really come out and are shown too frequently because the owners just feel that they're somewhat obscene. But when they're in a show, they're actually quite fun to look at. Let's go to a couple of his other pieces before we move on, Claudia. You know, he found his style. He started using clay. He was pretty much known for his sculptures, but he did drawings and other flat work too. He started using clay in a way that hadn't been used before. And the colors of his ceramics are usually deliberately bright, and they're in your face. And it's just meant to be fun. He just, he felt that we shouldn't take ourselves seriously, and we should poke fun at ourselves through our artwork, and that he did. So it's a very different aesthetic. And what was so interesting is that it actually had its beginnings to be shown at this very little gallery in Folsom. As I mentioned, that the funk art's kind of tactile, it's crudely made, and it's all very intentional. So he did many works on paper. This one on the right is called Pickin'. And frankly, who would do a self-portrait like that? You know, I can't think of many people who would want to show them, who, would want to show themselves picking their nose, but he had no problem doing that. The centerpiece is ceramic with his face on it. And on the far left is another ceramic called Bob. But the middle, I wanted to mention if you can't see the name of the one in the middle, is called Portrait of an Artist as a Clever Old Dog. And his dog dish says Bob on it. The one on the left, again, is Bob Arneson. At the very top is his house on Alice Street in Davis. And he was very fond of that house, and it appears many times in much of his work. Cost, you can still pick up an Arneson. He probably is one of the most expensive artists, but I've seen woodcuts of his for around $800, a litho for around $600 to $700. I saw a litho because he did the Pickin'. They were lithos and lithographs, and so you could pick one of those up. But he's probably the most highest paid, and some of his work is in the $500,000 range and up, depending on what it is and the size of it. And most of that work is ceramics work. All right, let's go to our next artist, Roy DeForest. He was mostly known as a painter on canvas, but he also did a lot of works on paper, and he dabbled in ceramics. He's very much known for his dogs, and in the photo on the left, you see his own dogs in the painting behind him, and he always had dogs in his studio. I saw a portrait or a photo of him before he passed in his studio painting. with dogs in it. So he always seemed to have dogs, and he always seemed to like those. I can't think of the name of it. They're not an Australian Shepherd, but they're like that. It's that dog with that's in this particular photo, and he always seemed to like that breed of dog. I think it's a blue heeler. That's what they're called, blue heelers. And much of his later work that includes the dogs, they frequently stand in for him as himself. So they're his alter egos. He was born in Nebraska. He studied at the California School of Fine Arts. He graduated in '52. And this California School of Fine Arts in the '50s was really a hotbed of abstract impressionism. So that's where he started at. And he did that for a time, but then he started rebelling, and then his style morphed from more of the abstract impressionism to more figurative. And so, as you can see, the abstract impressionism was just more shapes and forms and colors. The figurative started adding things in, or recognizable things in, and he attended San Francisco State as a graduate student, earning a degree in '53, and then he became a full-time professor at UC Davis in the '60s, and then eventually the head of the department. So the kind of the wacky piece on the right was an early work for him. It was 1962, which was the same year that the candy store opened. You can see how grounded he is in that abstract impressionism in this painting. But it's starting to become somewhat figurative. And then he just carried that further and further and further. And one of the best known things that he's known for are those little raised dots. Now, you can't see the dimension in this. You can only see it when you actually are in front of a painting. But those dots that you see, he squeezes them directly from the paint tube directly onto the canvas. So some people have described them as tiny chocolate dots. They've called them LSD tabs. They've said they're like nipples. And so there's all these different things that the viewer can equate with them. But he really ran with the idea of dots, and they're in a lot of his work. And at that time, he was looking at and probably influenced by the Aboriginal paintings from Australia. So, you're starting to feel that funk and whimsy come into this piece, and but let's go to his next ones, which really define his work. All right, the one on the left is called Recollections of a Sword Swallower. Say that fast 3 times, and that's when he hits his pivotal moment. It's inspired by an actual autobiography of a sword swallower. And he's starting to hit his stride in the late '60s as a funk artist. This painting is just, I have seen it because it is part of the Crocker collection and was on display for a while. It just bristles with this saturated color, notably red, which he puts in a lot of his paintings. And that red kind of reflects his early love of Matisse, which we have seen in some of our earlier tours. It just has these really surprising textures, those raised dots again, strange cartoonish characters, and it has dogs and horses and other animals. And it is just full of all kinds of imagery. Very bright. The one on the right, called Country Dog Gentleman, again has his signature motifs of the self-portrait of using dogs and rabbits. And it just is a lot of whimsy. Roy DeForest was kind of this human imagination person. They're populated with a menagerie of creatures. Some you can identify, some you can't. They're purely imaginary land, but you all feel wonder and joy when you look at them. And these are just paintings that make me smile. He was an artist that just was fun. Okay, now I just want to talk a little before we go to the next one about funk and nut art. You know, and the slight difference between them. It's not that they weren't closely related in terms of whimsicalness, or the craziness, or the absurdity, but a lot of artists this time were creating 2- and 3-dimensional art, and some of the artists who were creating the two-dimensional, the paintings or the flat work, paperwork, didn't think that the funk term totally fit with what they were doing. So they came up with this new term called nut art. It never really caught on, but there were many artists such as Roy DeForest and David Gilhouli, who we'll see, and Maya Peoples-Bright. They showed under that label, calling themselves nut artists. So basically the difference between funk and nut is more of a 2-dimensional undertaking versus the funk, which is the 3-dimensional. Roy DeForest's work are still reasonable. You can pick up some prints of his for $1,000. The highest that I could find in an auction for one of his oil canvases was about $85,000. So in the world of art, still reasonable. All right, let's go to our next one. And this guy is going to make you laugh. All right, this is David Gilhouli. And for him as the artist, it is a frog universe. It's never mind humans. He didn't care about the humans. He loved frogs. He imagined, according to him, a parallel universe in which frogs were at the top of the food chain. And he, you know, and he fit perfectly into this funk art group. He grew up in Auburn, right outside Sacramento, and then he studied at UC Davis. He was a student of Arneson, surprise, surprise, and that's how he got connected to the candy store. He received his BA in the late 60s, and I want to bring up Temporary Building 9. And that's where all the ceramic artists were working. And T9, it's called at UC Davis. And I mention it because this dump of a building, and believe me, I have seen it, and it is a dump, is on the National Register of Historic Places. And I can tell you it has nothing to do with the beauty of the architecture. It's just about the historical people who worked there. So I thought it was kind of an interesting thing that this building was part of on the historic, the National Register. Gilhouli taught at San Francisco State, at the University of Saskatchewan and Regina. And then there was actually a lot of overlap between Canada and some of the artists there working there and the candy store, because many of the funk artists would move back and forth from Canada back to Sacramento, and they showed their work at the candy store. And then, of course, Gilhouli moved to the University of Toronto, which this is the photograph that Kurt Fishbach captured him in his Volkswagen Thing. I believe that's what that vehicle was called, a Volkswagen Thing. Gilhouli was kind of an equal opportunity offender. So frogs could become anything that he wanted them to be. They could be a religious figure, they could be famous figures out of history, or they could be part of a sandwich. You just didn't know what you were going to get with him. Anyone could be part of Frog Nation. And the piece you see at the right is Frog Buddha. It's very different from him because usually his pieces were glazed with very, very bright colors. And this is glazed with a gold paint. Let's go to the next one, Claudia. This is, this is Gilhouli at his finest. The frog wedding cake on the right, the bride and groom frog are at the top, and there's lots of little amorous frogs chasing each other around the sides of the cake. It is a fun piece. And the jelly bean bear and the ark is also a fun piece. It has a frog in the front. but the main character is the bear that you see. Um, I think the frog is kind of a merfrog because there's a fishtail coming out the back. You know, Gilhouli did other animals, but he was really partial to frogs, and he did them his entire life. His artwork, he did some watercolors and ink work, and you can pick those up for $500-700. The small ceramics that you can still get those in online auctions that I've seen. In fact, I saw one to auction today for it was called Frog Sandwich, and it was at $1,200. But I've seen his work upward from $20,000 to $30,000 depending on the piece. So let's go to our next artist, Maya Peoples Bright. She was born in Latvia. She came to the United States with her family after the Second World War. She was well into completing her math degree at UC Davis in 1963, when her counselor advised her to take an art class to fulfill her general education requirements. And on her first day in the class, she stepped into the middle of the California funk movement, and she never left. She did eventually get her MBA, and she got her degree in math and an MBA, but she loved the work so much, she ended up palling around with Robert Arneson and William Willey and Peter Vandenberg, David Gilhouli, who we just saw, and Roy DeForest. She said she was so lucky that Davis was just this hotbed of art at the time that I was there. She said, I do art in just about everything, my shirts, crochet, my blankets. She said, I just had a good fortune to have people like Arneson around. And she's still with us today, and she lives in Rockland. And frankly, her, again, this Kurt Fishbach photo of her studio then, and it pretty much resembles her studio now, except her studio now is larger. She is still over the top craziness with supplies and thousands of animals. She did lots and lots of painting and some ceramics. She didn't do a lot of ceramics, but the one on the left is called Contagious Laughter. And that was from actually from the mid-90s. She was just known for her kooky titles and for her animals, and there's always some kind of pun involved. And this piece is just kind of makes you laugh. It's contagious. Let's go to our next one. There we go. This is an early work of hers called Beast Map. It's from 1965. So she was just getting into the rhythm of this funk art, and she's in graduate school, and she has this map of the world where the world is turning into animals, and they're kind of devouring each other. So it's pretty funky and odd, and the bright colors draw you in, but then you start looking really at a lot of the details. And like Roy DeForest, Maya also did dots, and there's a big argument, was a big argument between them about who did them first. But she did the dots differently. You know, where DeForest would take the paint tube and then glob dot, 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 dot out of the paint tube. She would take a stick and take the paint and then push it on and then pull it off. And they made very sharp little points of dots. And she says they're so sharp that they can literally inflict bodily harm. What I like about some of the stories I've read about her, she and Adeliza would sit on the front porch together, drinking wine and crocheting. And I think that's what nurtured this region as a funk and nut capital, as you know, is that one of the artists said, Sacramento is a town that doesn't eat you alive. It's not like New York or Los Angeles. It still has a bit of that small town quality that's on the verge of becoming a big city. And this is appealing to the artists who live there. And Maya agreed. She said it was more fun to be a big fish in a little pond. And it allowed her to really do her thing and not have the pressure of doing what was hot that year. She said she liked to take her own ideas, think them through, and hope that if I'm pleased with the finished product, then other people will react to them. She has local galleries. She still shows her work, and you can get one for $450, $500 for a print. And then her paintings are anywhere up from $4,000 to $5,000 to $6,000 and upwards, depending on what they are and the size of them. All right, Claudia, let's go to our next one. This is Peter Vandenberg. He also is still with us. He is still doing sculptures. He was born in the Netherlands. He moved to Indonesia with his family as a child. And then after World War II, they went to Australia and then to the Netherlands and then settled in Bakersfield in 1950. He received his bachelor's at Sac State, became an artist, and then received his master's at UC Davis. He taught at San Francisco State College and then Sacramento State College. And he became known for these really fantastical heads. You want you to go to the next slide, Claudia? Thank you. He's these very busts with these elongated heads. That's what he actually became known for. And kind of like Easter Island type. So the bust on the right is Paul Bachman, who was a professor that many people in our region studied with, and they had a great respect for. And he was a printmaker, so this is Vandenberg's ode to him. But on the left is Sin Yo Rita. Again, remember these titles are usually pretty funky and fun. And you can see how he's taking these iconic Mogdig, I always mispronounce it, Mogdigliani. Oh my gosh, I'm just entertaining myself here. Mogdigliani faces, which are these elongated faces, and he's applying that to sculpture. And obviously, Robert Arneson was a mentor, was one of his mentors, and you can see that clay work of his. This is Sandra Shannon house. She was born in Petaluma. She attended UC Davis, and she earned her Bachelor of Science and then an MA in Theater Arts. She began teaching summer courses in the late 70s at the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland, which I believe is where she met. I'm sorry, no, she didn't. She had met Robert Arneson before then. But she married Robert Arneson, and then she showed at the candy store several times. She actually became known for her depictions of food. And this is one of the series or pieces she's known for called Heart Boxes. She showed a whole variety of them, and they'd have a show, or Adeliza would have it at Valentine's Day, and they'd have this show, which I thought was quite appropriate, you know, a store about candy with candy boxes. But these are so realistic. The nougat that she's bit into, the candy, looks so real on these. So I'm actually anxious to see this one in person. All right, let's go to our last group of artists. Okay. Then there was the Chicago Harry Who bunch with Gladys Nielsen and Jim Nutt. And let me tell you that the Harry Who was neither a style or a movement. It was just simply the name of 6 Chicago artists that they who decided to join forces and exhibit together from 1966 to 68. The 6 artists, which included Gladys Nielsen and Jim Nutt, and then another artist named Carl Worsom, all ended up at Sac State teaching. And then they brought the Harry Who aesthetic to our region. The name Harry Who was coined by Carl Worsom, who, by the way, passed away last year, in reference to a FM station art critic, Harry Boras. When Carl said Harry Who, he didn't know who he was, and the name just stuck because the art critic was criticizing their art. It fit really well with funk art, and it just further kind of added to that frenzy of activity that was going on. The Harry Who aesthetic could be caustic, it could be vulgar, loud, had psychedelic patterns and clashing colors. It was bad taste in a lot of cases, and it was brilliant fun. They were influenced by tattoos and graffiti and books and comic books and magazines and toys and games and advertisement. And their art kind of stayed more towards pop art, but unlike New York pop art, if you think of Andy Warhol at that time, the Chicago variety took the pop culture as a starting point and then kind of diverged. It became much darker, more sexually charged. And it was also less cool as far as and more a more personal approach, whereas the New York was less so. Gladys Nielsen on the left was born in Chicago. She graduated from the School of Art Institute. She met and married Jim Nutt, the gentleman on the right. They moved to Sacramento in the late 60s and began teaching at Sac State. She exhibited with Adeliza actually through 1988, even though they had both moved back to Chicago in the mid-70s to teach at the Art Institute there. And both of them alive today still live there, and they still paint. Nielsen's works on the left kind of look a lot like watercolors, but this one is actually acrylic on canvas. It's a fun piece. Her pieces were very bright, and it was very stylized for her at the time. Jim Nutt's was piece on the left. He was born in Massachusetts. He moved to Chicago, went to the Institute of Art where he met Gladys, and then again moved to Sacramento with her to teach at Sac State. This piece on the right is called Awkward, and it's a work that's sometimes often difficult to look at because it's kind of more about the human condition and our bodies. There's some humor in it, it's cartoony, but it's really dark humor. And he intended it to be that way. Jim Nutt painted a lot or drew a lot of women. Most of his work were women's bodies, women's heads. And it changed somewhat. This is an early piece, late 60s. And as he came along, it started changing to more a different style, less cartoony style. His works still sell for about $1,500 to $2,000 for a pencil drawing. And I've seen everything up to $500,000 for a painting. So maybe a little out of my reach, but for a painting. Okay. Now I just want to kind of end we went through a lot of artists tonight. As I said, there were hundreds of them, and I just picked a few, but I want to go to the next one because if you are out and about Sacramento region, you're going to see some public art. But I can't stress enough the impact these region artists had on the art scene nationally and internationally. These artists were living in a place that was a very creative environment. As I said, it was affordable, and it had three great academic institutions that were national forerunners in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in producing a list of well-known artists. Dozens and dozens of artists, including the great Wayne Thiebaud and Gregory Condos. What I appreciate about all of these artists is that they just didn't teach technique. They taught the idea of how to be an artist, what an artist looks like. You know, students following in their footsteps didn't only learn what they said, but they looked at their work and then they looked at the trail of work that they followed. And they were mentors to many, many of their students. So here's a few of the pieces of public funk and nut art. There's a whole series of these eggheads on the UC campus by Robert Arneson. This one's called Yin and Yang. Below that are two mosaics that are in the Sacramento International Airport. One is called Flying Colors by Suzanne Aden, and then a fragment of the universe by Joan Moment. And they are beautiful, beautiful pieces. The Indo Arch that many of you know, that's between old Sacramento and then beginning of downtown. Lollies, which were a series of older ladies done by Ruth Rippon. And this one's in the Pavilion Center, but there's also UCD Med Center has some lollies at it. And the huge tile mural at the California Energy Commission building on 9th and P Street was done by Roy DeForest, and which was very controversial at the time. And it's still there, in badly need of an update. It's quite faded. So those were pieces. There's many other areas where you can see work by these artists in public areas. And so that's kind of a brief overview of the funk and nut art. And I'd like to end tonight with a piece that Claudia is going to do our meditation on. And it's one of our region's premier artists who died last year, and that's Gregory Condos. And frankly, there's never mistaking a Condos work. Each piece is a love letter to the Sacramento region, especially his renderings of the Sacramento River Delta. And he just has this gorgeous, buttery spread of bright, warm color. And, you know, even his blues are warm. So gazing at the piece we're about to meditate on, you can immerse yourself really in the tranquility of the scene and feel that you're in the scene and not gazing at it. So Claudia, I'm going to turn it over to you for our meditation tonight.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you. And yes, Suzanne picked this piece for you so that you could meditate on it. So if you just focus on this beautiful painting of the Sacramento River called the Sacramento River. Gregory Condos said, "I'm the boss of the blues, and that is what made me." So as you sit comfortably, I invite you to consciously relax your whole body. In your mind's eye, just scan your body. Are you noticing that you're holding tension anywhere? Your next breath, just breathe that beautiful breath into that area of your body. And in your mind, just say relax. When we meditate, some say it's best to lightly close your eyes and shut out any visual distractions. However, another approach is just to soften your gaze on the calmness of this river, the peacefulness of the sky, and imagine your mind calm and peaceful beneath the surface of thoughts that might flit by. And now let that breath relax your body even further. Breathing in to a count of 4 or 5. Hold, and then release your breath to a count that's twice as long. As you gaze upon this beautiful, calm river, let your thoughts move to peace. And gently nudge aside any errant thoughts that pop into your mind. And breathe in peace. And now breathe out calm. Breathing in peace. Breathing out calm. There's no other moment than right now. Centering yourself with each breath. In peace. Out calm. And as you continue to breathe in and out, I invite you to listen to the poem called Centering by Dana Folds. Here, right now, bring your mind to this place in time. Invite it, even if it resists, to sit and witness what it is to be alive. Let there be no ulterior motive in this moment, but to be. Rest on the waves of breath and choose to experience all of it. Let thoughts float through and leave again as the mind slowly settles like snow inside a shaken paperweight. This is all there is. Here, right here and now. So much in life pulls our attention away from the now. But the now is all we truly have. And the now is full of opportunity to grow and learn and deepen our connection with self. When we are present in this now, we know that we are safe. We know that we are calm. We know that we are real. And we know we can take this feeling of calm and peace into every moment of our day. We are amazing. We are so truly amazing. Namaste, my dear friends. And now I will let you breathe back into this space and invite Suzanne to unmute herself and give us a preview of what's next at the Crocker. Suzanne?
Oh, thank you, Claudia. If anybody had, I did go through this very, very quickly. We could spend a whole hour on just an artist easily, but I want to just go over what currently and is coming to the Crocker. Right now we have the Hands and Earth, which are contemporary Japanese ceramics. And Patricia, I know you're on. You've got to come see this one. Patricia is our resident ceramicist. And I think you would be amazed at the work that they have done here, and that runs through April. Stephen DeStabler, done mask and monumental figures, is here till April 3rd. It's yeah, it's one that I'm not warm and fuzzy about, but it certainly is interesting, his style of work. The Candy Store, which we just got a preview of, opens January 3rd, and it runs for several months. And then I'm looking forward to this one, beginning late August. It's called Another World. It's the Transcendental Painting Group. And that was a really interesting group of artists who went in a very transcendental way, I guess is the best way to call it. And then in October is Modern Women, Modern Vision, which are photography from the Bank of America collection on women photographers. And it's supposed to be pretty spectacular. So I'm looking forward to a lot of those. So does anybody have a question or comment about our funk and nut artists? Okay. I
do.
Hi, Patricia.
I just want to know, what kind of drugs do you think they were on?
Well, it was the 60s and 70s. Take a guess.
I'm thinking psilocybin. Some forms of psilocybin.
And more.
Could have been a couple of cocktails in there.
Yeah, well, they just push the boundaries, like any group that is revolting away from a set style, just like the Impressionists did. Those people, they thought they were smoking something, I'm sure. So, it's just whenever a group pushes away from an existing or the status quo, and they moved in a really different direction. I do have to say, I went to UC Davis as a student. I did take a class by Robert Arneson. I had one by Wayne Thiebaud. I had no idea who they were. And I had no interest in doing ceramics. And I had heard of the Candy Store, and I had heard of the work that was being displayed there, and I had no interest in going and seeing. What a fool.
I have a comment too.
Hi, Judy.
Yeah. Has anyone else ever been to the Candy Store?
Not when it was the Candy Store. No, did you?
Yeah. When I first moved here, I met a woman who owned a gallery in Davis, and she and I became friends. And I think she thought she should educate me in terms of what was going on in Sacramento. So she sent me to the Candy Store, but I think I had been working all day, and I probably had on my navy blue blazer and my little briefcase or whatever. And I walked into the store, and I looked around the gallery, and I looked around, and she started in trying to sell me right away. I mean, she just really pushed hard. And I don't remember exactly, but I probably said, "I'm just looking." And she got behind me, and she walked me right out of the store. And I got out, out of the store, and I thought, what just happened? And that was my introduction to Adeliza. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she looked like such a nice old gal.
She was sort of overly solicitous, overly sweet, overly just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And
the story, Judy, the stories I've heard about her is that there were people coming into the gallery looking actually for candy. And then they would, once they saw it wasn't, they would kind of beat a hasty retreat, and they couldn't get out fast enough. But sometimes she cornered people. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
And she would block the door to make a sale. And she when she had them, some of them she turned into believers, and they bought art, and others she'd say, "Hey, if you want to take it home, go ahead and you like it, go ahead and take it. You can pay me $10 a month or $50, whatever makes sense to you. And if you don't like it, you can bring it back." So
I was from a really conservative part of the country, and I wasn't used to, having this interaction with people you'd never met right away, and she was just overwhelming, and she didn't like me either. So anyway, it was a fun in retrospect, it was a really fun experience.
Wow. Interesting. Wow. Well, she was she was a firm believer in
very good.
this type of art, and she really
Yes.
fought for her. And it was amazing that she made a go of it for 30 years.
Yeah.
Because it was a way out of the way place. It wasn't a high-end gallery. It was really funky.
It was a really it was almost run down looking from the outside. When you walked into it, you just, you know, didn't know what you were getting into, because it, you know, it really looked sort of ramshackle from the outside.
Yeah. So it was pretty amazing what she did, and
Yeah.
how these artists became nationally, internationally known. And a lot of it had to do with her. So
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
interesting. Anything else? Any other comments? Okay. Well, thank you for
Thanks for
joining us.
us.
Yeah, it was fun. This was a fun one to put together, kind of.